think aloud is thinking while reading to yourself and kind of thinking and asking yourself questions. And I picked an article called The Legend of the Mothman, and it interested me because I kind of like this picture. And but let's see how the Mothman is described by witnesses. The state of West Virginia has played home to one of the most bizarre pseudo-cryptids ever reported, the unusual but by no means unique Mothman. When I think of a Mothman, I think of this giant light bulb with moths flying around it, one as big as a man. So, the first sighting came in the early 1960s. A woman was driving along Route 2 near the Ohio River with her father. As she neared the Chief Cornstalk hunting grounds, a large man-shaped figure walked out into the road. As the woman slowed her car, the figure spread two large wings and took off. Ironically, the witness did not report the incident. Who would believe us anyway? Nah, really, not many people would believe her. The first sighting which received publicity, though, was one in 1965. A woman living near the Ohio River related how her son had told her one day of seeing an angel outside. She thought nothing more of it until about a year later. She really thought he was just using his imagination. In the summer of 1966, a doctor's wife in the same general area said that she had been seeing a 6-foot-long thing resembling a giant butterfly. On November the 12th, 5 gravediggers, how appropriate a profession, saw something which looked like a brown human being flying out of the trees near Clendenin. One of the witnesses, Kenneth Duncan, said that they watched the creature for almost a minute. Point Pleasant to Clendenin, which is near Charleston, about an hour and a half away. Wow, that's a good distance. On the 14th of the month, Salem resident Newell Partridge saw the 2 red objects hovering above the field. His German Shepherd, Bandit, took off into the field and was never seen again. The next night, Mr. and Mrs. Roger Scarberry, Mr. and Mrs. Steve Mallett were driving near the TNT area. Near the town of Point Pleasant, a tall figure stood by the side of the road. It was shaped like a man, but bigger, Mr. Scarberry said, maybe 6.5 to 7 feet tall, and it had a big wings folded against his back. His wife commented on his huge red eyes, like automobile reflectors. Mr. Scarberry, who was driving, took off in his car at better than 100 miles per hour. The figure spread its wings and flew after the car. It did not seem to have flaps its wings at all, and its wingspan was over 10 feet. Mrs. Mallett said that it made a squeaking sound like a big mouse. The 4 also noted that a dead dog had been lying at the side of the road, but was gone when they returned. They went to the offices of the Mason County Sheriff and reported their sighting. Deputy Millard Halstead returned to the TNT area with the 4 and said that as he passed the spot where they had initially seen the figure, his police radio made a sound similar to a speeding up record. The TNT area, which seemed to be a sort of a home for the Mothman, as it was quickly dubbed by the press, is a large tract of land. Small concrete igloos dot the landscape, using World War II to store ammunition. The TNT area is adjacent to a 2,500-acre McClintock Wildlife Station. The entire area is covered with dense forest, steep hills, and riddled with tunnels. Well, if I was going to hide someplace, that'd probably be a good place to hide. Let's see what happens next. The area is also sparsely populated. One of the families living in the area is that of Ralph Thomas. On the 16th at about 9 p.m., Mr. and Mrs. Raymond Walmsley, Mrs. Marcella Bennett, and Mrs. Bennett's daughter Tina were visiting the Thomases. On the way there, they watched a red light which circled the TNT area. When the car pulled up in front of the Thomases, it disturbed something. It seemed as if it had been lying down. It rose up slowly from the ground, a big gray thing, bigger than a man, with terrible glowing red eyes. The witness ran into the Thomas house, where they had let it in by 3 children. The figure shuffled along behind them, coming onto the porch and looking through the window. Mr. Walmsley called the police, but the thing had, of course, vanished by the time they arrived. Mrs. Bennett, who lives at the edge of Point Pleasant, says she has heard the creature on other occasions. She describes the sound it makes like a woman screaming. Oh, geez, this is getting so exciting and kind of scary. Let's see what else happens. And I'm picturing, like I said, kind of like a giant butterfly, gray butterfly right now. It makes me wonder if it's kind of real. Paul Yoder and Ben Enix, two firemen, said they had seen Mothman in the TNT area on the 18th. Richard West of Charleston called the police on November the 21st. A winged figure was sitting on the roof of his neighbor's house, he said. The 6-foot-tall figure had a wingspan of 6 to 8 feet and red eyes. It took off straight up like a helicopter. So it goes 100 miles an hour, flies up straight up like a helicopter. This thing's pretty weird sounding. Tom Urey was driving along Route 62 near the TNT area on the morning of November the 25th. He saw a large grayish figure standing in the field. When it spread its 2 large wings, lifted straight into the air, and flew over Urey's car at the altitude 3 telephone poles high, probably about 50 to 60 feet. The next day, Mrs. Ruth Foster of St. Albans said the creature was standing in her yard near her porch. Her description tallies with the West. The same day, people in Lowell, Ohio, saw several large birds flying over Cat's Creek. The 3 witnesses followed the birds in their car and said that they were dark brown with some light flecks. Their breasts were gray and they had 5 or 6 inch bills, straight, not curved like those of hawks or vultures. The birds seemed to have reddish heads. Okay, so 2 people in West Virginia, an hour or so apart, driving distance, and some people in Ohio. They're just described birds, but the others were describing the same thing, but not as a bird. And still, more sightings came. On November the 27th, on the way home from church, Connie Carpenter saw a grayish figure standing in the golf course near Mason. The creature took off and flew straight towards her car. She was one of the few who had actually saw the creature's face, although her description, "It was horrible," doesn't much help. Another sighting took place on the same night in St. Albans, where 2 girls saw the creature near a junkyard. The creature flew after them. Evidently, he's starting to get a little aggressive. Let's find out what happens next. On December the 4th, 5 pilots at the Gallipolis, Ohio airport saw some sort of giant bird flying at about 70 miles per hour. Its wings weren't moving, and unlike other witnesses, they commented on the long neck. Well, I've never heard of a bird flying 70 miles per hour. I've never heard of a bird being 6 foot, 7 foot tall and fly. Well, emu and ostrich are 6 to 7 feet tall with long necks, but they don't fly. Mabel McDaniel, coincidentally mother of Linda Scarberry from one of the first witnesses, saw Mothman on January 11th, 1967. Mrs. McDaniel said that at first the creature looked like it was an airplane. Then I realized it was flying too low. It was brown and had a wingspan of at least 10 feet. In March, an Ohio man claimed his car was chased by a flying creature. The last sighting seemed to have come on November the 2nd, shortly after noon. Mrs. Ralph Thomas from the Bennett sighting heard a squeak fan bell outside her home and saw a tall gray figure moving among the concrete domes in the TNT area. Scattered sightings continued for several years afterwards. In 1968, especially, a number of hairy humanoids with glowing eyes were seen on Jericho Road. And in September the 18th, people in the TNT area supposedly saw Mothman once more, putting on his last appearance, it seems. So it went from seeing one to like a gaggle of them. This doesn't sound good. Let's find out what happens next, since it said it's his last appearance. In late 1966, when the Mothman reports started to die down, other phenomena started to up in the area. Several UFOs were seen near Point Pleasant. Animals were mutilated in the surrounding areas, and the Mothman witnesses reported poltergeist and men in black phenomenon. This has led to many research and speculated on the connection between the Mothman and UFOs. But no discussion of the Mothman phenomenon would be complete without recounting the story of the Silver Bridge. On the evening of December 15th in 1967, the Silver Bridge, which crossed the Ohio River in Point Pleasant, collapsed in a rush hour. Over 46 cars fell into the river. It was the biggest disaster ever to hit Point Pleasant. Oh gosh. I wonder if they think the Mothman did it. Of course, it was only a matter of time before people began to connect this disaster with the Mothman sightings. Was Mothman some sort of warning signal? Was the entire saga somehow connected to the UFO seen in the area? Has a final postscript, New Haven, farmer Ernest Atkins reported something very odd indeed in April of 1969. He found his 11-week-old puppy lying dead in the front yard. There was no evidence that the dog had died in a fight. Well, of course, 11-week-old puppy is not very old. It's just a couple months old. What made it sound strange was the fact that the dog's chest was chewed open and his heart was lying on the outside. Not surprisingly, most scientists scoffed at this theory. They said it was probably just some normal kind of bird. The favorite culprit was the sandhill crane. These large birds were reddish patches on their heads, according to the Mothman's red eyes, and large specimen could reach roughly the attribute to the size of the Mothman. But other birds were found in the area that could account for the sightings. In July of 1967, several boys found a large vulture near the New Haven. And at Galapagos Free, a farmer shot a rare bird indeed, an Arctic snow owl. The owl was 2 feet tall and had 5-foot wingspan. The Mothman went from being a man 6 to 7 feet tall, and now they're trying to pass off birds with long necks that had red heads. Then, now they're saying it could possibly have been an owl. I wonder if it was really some kind of bird, or if it was just a Mothman. I guess we'll have to learn more about it.